The mighty Colorado. The big muddy Mississippi. The sacred Nile. The Yangtze, or Chongjiang, meaning long river. And the biblical Euphrates. Since recorded history, these rivers and their life-bringing water have been quintessential to the human story and development. But now, the world over, these once mighty rivers are drying up. Let's take a look. As people spread around the world, they would often follow the natural waterways, enjoying the relatively easy life of fishing and hunting the abundant wildlife that would gather to quench their own thirst. And so it is this allure that caused early humans to settle down, building camps that dotted rivers, mainly to facilitate the trade of fur, but other goods as well. Eventually, this sedentary lifestyle would lead to the advent of agriculture, allowing early humans to leave their hunter-gatherer lifestyle behind. In 1500 BC, along the Colorado River, one such peoples, known only as the basket makers, began to settle in. Here, they would establish an empire that would last for several thousand years and come to be known as the Anasazi. And though the Anasazi cultivated corn and had a thriving population that built impressive cities into rock shelves, in cliff walls, not many irrigation canals have been found. This is likely due to the abundance of water they had come to expect from the Colorado. But in the late 1200 AD, a massive drought struck, and the Colorado dried up. As the water evaporated, so too did the Anasazi people vanish, probably migrating south to the Rio Grande and joining the Pueblo people. Today, the Colorado River is no less important. 40 million people rely on it for water. It supplies around 17 million acre-feet of water a year. That's a whopping 5.5 trillion gallons. But the worst drought seen in 1,200 years is gripping the American Midwest, and the Colorado River system is currently at 35% capacity. This is dangerously low. In fact, if reserves behind the Hoover Dam drop a mere 90 more feet, it won't be able to generate power, leaving 1.3 million people in the dark. Just a little east, the Mississippi River fares little better. Starting in Minnesota, it flows south for 2.3 thousand miles through 10 American states. It facilitates the movement of tens of millions of tons of grain and other products from all over the American heartland by floating barges down the river to ports in the Gulf of Mexico. Today, the water levels have dropped so much that it has created a backup for over 2,000 barges, stalling millions of tons of food product and exacerbating the logistical stresses, causing shortages and inflation. But America is not alone in its water woes. Since as early as 5000 BC, the Badarian people had already established themselves along the Nile, fishing, raising animals, and farming the rich Nile shores. Every year, the Nile would flood, pushing back the arid desert and depositing its gift of nutrient-rich silt soil from the heartland of Africa itself. The civilization they started here would last for thousands of years, merging with other tribes along the Nile, like the Nakada people, and they would form the Egyptian Empire, whose people can still be found along the Nile today. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Nile River is truly under threat of destruction. Climate change has caused the level of the Mediterranean to rise, causing brackish seawater to flow back into the river. And upstream, in Ethiopia, a dam is being built. It will provide power for the Ethiopian people, but this will further reduce the flow of the Nile. And maybe more damaging, will cause the silt to build up in the dam reservoir, cutting off Egypt from the annual flood and its life-bringing nutrients. This could be disastrous for Egypt, and though talks are ongoing, Egypt has already threatened war over the issue. And with Egypt's population expected to hit 123.5 million by 2050, there is little room to negotiate. But the number of people affected by the Nile pales in comparison to the 1.2 billion people supported by the Yangtze River, or Long River as it is translated from its Chinese nickname. China has been hit by one of the worst heat waves in recorded history, possibly anywhere in the world, with temperatures hitting 104 degrees for months on end. Much like the Nile, the Yangtze floods annually and carries massive amounts of silt downriver. Normally, the Yangtze has a flow rate of 1,100,000 cubic feet a second, or 31,000 cubic meters a second. But now, that is down to barely a trickle. This is Poyang Lake, usually the largest freshwater lake in China, now empty. This is creating an ecological nightmare. The Yangtze's 416 species of fish lay dead in mass. Earthworms, unable to dig hardened soil, surface only to die under the sun. The people themselves are forced to search deep into caves for water and to stay cool from the heat. Widespread power shortages rock the country. In fact, Three Gorges Dam cannot release any more water or it will not be able to function. The environmental toll is of biblical proportion. But perhaps no river is more biblical than the Euphrates. And here, the prophets of doom have long heralded the Armageddon facing humans should the rivers run dry. In the past, the Euphrates had a flow rate of 7,500 cubic meters a second. Now, though, it has a flow rate of less than 200 cubic meters a second, and 90% of that is diverted for human use, leaving not but a trickle to reach the Persian Gulf. With such a drought the world over, it is hard not to imagine Armageddon. Revelations 9:14, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of man.